and welcome to the Thriving Writer Show. Today on the show, I've got a writer who is fairly new to me and has been on Medium for not quite a year, but has amassed over 22,000 followers in that time. Kris Gage, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to chat.
Great, I'm looking forward to this. Well, tell me, when did you first think of yourself as a writer?
I think like most writers, I have always been writing, probably since I knew how. So early elementary school, I was playing around with short stories and creative writing. And then I think mid-elementary school, I started keeping what was then a diary. And then I just continued journaling and writing different pieces. Up until last year, up until 2017, it was mostly on like private blogs and still like paper. So I've been writing almost my whole life, but I haven't been on a public content like Medium or public platform like Medium until 2017.
Okay. Well, cool. I can relate to always thinking of myself as a writer too. I would do that when the other boys were out playing with soldiers and trying to kill each other. I was in my room writing and trying to sort out life and that kind of thing. I see you write a lot about relationships and a few other things. And of course, we all want our relationships to be good. And you seem to be pretty honest about what you see out there. What have you found about that resonates with the people that read your work or just people out there in general?
Yeah, I think some of the most interesting topics that I think resonate really strongly are the subjects around toxic love and healthy love. And I've found that what most of us think of as love and the models that we've picked up, especially from like mass media, film and songs and things like that, and even to some extent the relationships around us, is effectively codependence, and it's not actually conducive to a great relationship. So the conversations that I have around that are usually the ones that do the best. People are really interested in what that means for them, especially tying it back to failed relationships. A lot of followers that reach out to me are people who are struggling with a breakup or struggling to find a partner. And that's the sort of thing that they mention is being really impactful is those sorts of dialogues.
So in a sense, you are just reaching people at a point where they're feeling a lot of pain and just maybe speaking truth into that in a way that's not, I don't know, offensive, I guess, or at least in a way that they want to hear it. Is that what you found a lot of, maybe just in your work as something that developed there, or how did this all come about?
Yeah, so the reason that I started writing in April of this year was twofold. So one, I had just gone through a breakup a few months before. So I had some questions, like the same questions that we all have, which is, what happened? What went wrong? How can I do it better? What does a good relationship even look like? I talked pretty openly about the fact that there were some levels of like emotional manipulation and kind of like toxic emotions happening that I wasn't able to identify when I was in it. And the more that I started looking, the more I realized how widespread that problem is. Like we do, these like manipulative tactics and like even things like the silent game and silent treatment, all these things that are so common are actually really, really toxic emotionally. So I was dealing with identifying a lot of those things in my own life. And then I also realized that a lot of my friends had questions around particularly dating, like how to get into relationships. And two friends in particular, whom I don't name just to like keep them, anonymous and respect their privacy, but I write for two of my friends in particular almost always. They're two really close friends that have a lot of questions that I felt like I had some insight to, especially as I was thinking about my own situation and doing a ton of reading on like healthy relationships. So that's kind of how it started, is I just started putting those answers down on paper and like getting them out into the world just to see, are other people asking these questions? And yeah, it turns out that many people are.
Awesome. And I like what you mentioned about writing to two particular people. I think that probably makes it a lot more personal and, you know, easier to resonate with, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. I was reading through some of your work, and I know you emphasize that a lot, and I absolutely agree. One friend, she is now in a relationship, but a lot of her questions were around dating. She is very interested in the dating scene, even though she's in a committed relationship. But similar to MySpace, she's very interested in like the problems that people have getting into relationships, especially with dating apps and things like this, and why is it so difficult. And then my other friend, she is still single, and she is having, I guess, a similar problem, but more firsthand. And she thinks about things very much so in terms of like almost like an idealization of a partner. So for her, it's very singular focus. So I get these kind of two different perspectives where, one is sort of a vessel for all of these like dating questions, and she's asking them really frequently, and she and I talk about it. And then one is like actually like a firsthand experience. So those two women are the ones that I think of and I have in mind, and I almost like write to them. And sometimes I will literally write a response to a question that, they asked me, or a conversation that we had. So yeah, it helps a lot. And the reason is like, I think it makes it a lot more intimate, and we are unique, but at the same time, there's a pretty consistent like human experience. So when you write for someone, you end up connecting with a lot of people who share that problem or that pain point. But it resonates on a much more, I guess, intimate level.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, the way you describe yourself, I kind of like that. Drink slinger of the South, and that just reminds me that you're probably a pretty relational person, or just somebody that I would probably know in my own life, because I like to drink beer every so often. I live in the South, it's got its own culture, right? And that probably in itself leads to a lot of things that probably feed into your writing, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The biggest thing that I've learned about people, or I guess the biggest thing I've learned from being a bartender, is how consistent we are. We have different ways of channeling our pain points as people, and our vulnerabilities and insecurities and aspirations. But they kind of always come across in the same way. So it's funny that, I wrote an article about this, and I didn't expect it to be as popular as it was, but it really took off. It was like top 3 things I've learned about consumers I learned from being a bartender. And the takeaway there, my day job is also in software. I do a lot of different things, but I'm in digital marketing by day, and then bartend, and then also do the writing. And what I've found is how consistent people are across all 3 of those. And bartending is really interesting because it's almost the inverse of writing, where my role there is a little bit scripted. Like the sort of things I share are, drinks and, greetings, and then just kind of listening, and it's interesting, the sort of things that people will share with you, especially around like why they're ordering a certain drink, or how they order their drink, or how their drink order differs based on the context of like who they're there with, who they're like trying to be, like what persona. So yeah, I learned a lot through that, and captured a lot of it in that piece that I wrote. So it's fun. It's also a really high energy. It's literally the opposite of writing. I mean, it's so high energy. It's tons of quick, very like scripted interactions from my side, and tons of like micro interactions that are really fun.
Yeah. I kind of can look back on my background in retail, and it's similar, but maybe not exactly. It doesn't have the festive atmosphere that a bar can have, at least. Well, let me ask you this: from being in a bar, you probably see people that maybe not at their best, and you feel like that amplifies a lot of the things that are really going on inside of them?
That's a good question. I think the bar that I am at, they don't always, I don't get a lot of people come in by themselves and like pour their hearts out to me. But it does definitely come across in like the drinks that they order and the way that they order them. So you can definitely tell, um, for example, like if someone orders a scotch and then does not feel compelled to talk about scotch, that's one thing. If they order the scotch and then feel compelled to tell whoever they're with all about the region, and they either mispronounce it or get it wrong, you can tell that they're kind of stepping into that a little bit and trying to do something with the scotch. So it's more that, it's a little bit more subtle. It's not as much as it is like in the movies where someone's like crying on the bar. I mean, you get that occasionally, but it's very rare. It's almost all the interactions where you kind of see what people are really feeling and thinking and aspiring towards is just reading between the lines, which is, I mean, you have enough of the interactions, you can see kind of what's happening.
Yeah, I guess it's easier to do that as an observer than it maybe is face to face.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I guess probably maybe one of your focuses is just to maybe keep people from doing stupid things that they that they wouldn't otherwise see when they're in the middle, like of a bad relationship or something like that. How do you handle that in a way that people will listen to what you have to say?
That's a good question. So I think, to the extent that people want to do things in relationships and they're happy with that, I think it's totally fine. I think the bigger thing for me is people who are interested in the question of why am I not happy in relationships, or why am I not happy in the decisions I've made in my life, but particularly in love. So it's one of the greatest parts of life and one of the things that adds the most meaning, and certainly something that I think 99% of people aspire towards is like finding a partner or partners or whatever that means for you, like some kind of intimate human connection. And yet so many of us feel unfulfilled. So it's more helping people address that gap between like expectation and not even expectation, because that makes it sound like it's like idealized and fake. I don't think it is. I think you absolutely can find a really happy relationship. And I think what's happening is that our approach is wrong. It's a little bit flawed. So it's more that, and it's like walking people through the common mistakes that we all make. And I think what I often try to do is admit that I've done this too. I try not to come from a position of like academic or clinical. I say this all the time, but I think it's really hurtful when, at least I have felt this way when I started doing research on love, and I would go to resources like books, and I have a very personal, real, emotional need or pain point, and then you find a resource where they're speaking clinically, like they're not sharing anything back. They just want you to like open yourself up, and then they're not sharing any of themselves. So that's usually how I try to connect, is like, hey, this is probably what you're doing, and I know that because I did that, and I still do that sometimes. And it's a whole laundry list of what you called stupid stuff, which is true and fair. Like, it's just stuff that we pick up from bad models, and it's just not stuff that's conducive. So yeah, it's just identifying, this is the goal, the shared goal that almost all of us have. This is the thing that almost all of us do. And this is a better approach from like tons and tons of reading that I've done, and then like my own experience to some extent, but mostly I read a ton. I read a ton on this. I think there's still a big need for better resources, but yeah, it's my overarching thing is just there's a gap between what we can have and the way that we're going about it. It's almost like we all want to be healthy, and yet it's so easy to slip into these habits that aren't, and we're not quite able to discern what's like normal. Like, I drink every day, and that's definitely not healthy, but there's such a culture of drinking every day that sometimes it's hard to discern that as like a big problem. That seems overly obvious. Like, yeah, you shouldn't drink every day. But we do stuff like that all the time in so many areas of our life. So I don't know if that answered the question, but that's kind of my approach.
Yeah, I think it is a lot easier to take advice from somebody who seems like a friend and who isn't on an ivory tower saying, hey, this is the way it goes. That's kind of like sitting in a college professor's class and he's pontificating all these things to you, and you're sitting there going, or or if you're like me, I was an artist, so I would, if it was particularly boring, I would draw pictures of the professor on my notes instead of taking notes. Just that kind of thing. And I think that's probably why at least a big reason why you have so many people following you around and wanting to hear what you had to say. Well, let me ask you this: what about an email list? Are you collecting people for that? And once you get them, then how do you keep them engaged with you?
Yeah, so this is something that I only just recently started. I know, I'm in digital marketing, so I understand the importance of an email list. I just wanted to make sure that I was entering into the writing with the right goal and the right focus, which maybe sounds like a cop-out. I'm not sure, but my goal was never to build an email list. And I know that sounds a little odd, maybe, except for the people that follow me who are probably pleased to hear that. At least I would feel that way. So I've just recently started focusing on it a little bit more. I have no idea what to do with it other than, I know, like, in theory, what to do with an email list. But my goal right now really is to keep massaging the message that I'm putting out. That's my real goal, is like, what's the big problem? What's the language people are using around the problem? How can I address that? And how can I do it in a way that resonates? So for me, the email list was kind of secondary. I honestly don't even know how many emails I have. I know that I receive emails from followers, and I know that people have signed up for my list, but it's definitely not something where I'm like checking the numbers, even like ever, honestly. So definitely not like every day or anything. But eventually, especially as I start to think about, maybe putting a book together and things like that, it would absolutely make sense to keep people engaged. So unfortunately, I have kind of a weak answer for right now, but plans to improve.
No, that's okay. I was just curious about that, as some of the people I have talked with are curious. And I guess the only thing that I can think of, and don't take this as necessarily the gospel of advice, but I would think that probably a similar approach to what you're using just to connect with people through your work would probably work in email too, but maybe a shorter version of the same thing. But it's something to think about, and love to talk about that later. Okay, so I see too that you are on a lot of publications on Medium. So what's your strategy there? How do you choose where to go? I mean, do you fit it to your niche, or do you do it for exposure, or is there a combination of those things going on?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have a kind of a weak answer here as well. So there was no strategy, and all of the publications that I am on reached out to me. So I just focused on writing stuff that was valuable, and eventually publications started requesting stories. So almost always I'll accept. There's only been one instance where I took the acceptance back, and it was because they got really spammy. I won't name the publication, but that's the only time that I did. They added a lot of spam to my actual piece, and then they started spamming me like 10 times a day after that. So that's the only publication that I don't work with. But other than that, I don't care about number of followers. I don't necessarily care about niche. And the reason being, they know their publication better than I do. So it's no cost to me. Maybe there are writers who worry about like branding, and I don't, to the extent that someone wants to cross post, I'm totally fine with it. The only time where I've had to really make a decision is when more than one requests the same story. So sometimes it takes me a day to like get into my email, and sometimes two may have requested the same. So in those cases, it's a little bit arbitrary depending on my mood, but I may just pick the one that requested soonest, so the email that came in first. There have been some cases where I felt like one was a perfect fit for the piece and one was like a little bit obscure. So in those cases, I might pick that one. I almost never go by number of followers for the publication. I think maybe once I did, and I think the only reason was like they came in close to the same time and they were both the exact right genre for the piece. So I guess somewhat selfishly, I just went with the highest number of followers, but that was one time. Usually there's almost no decision involved. It's just kind of accepting.
Awesome. So it sounds like if you focus on the message that you want to convey and just provide valuable information to the people who are reading, then a lot of this stuff could just happen naturally as it has for you. Is that right?
Yeah, that's how it's felt. I'm kind of obsessive about the message, and I spend a lot of time, like there's a stack of probably 20 books to my right over here that like I read a ton. So every piece is like hours of reading that I've done. And I just want it to be good. So it's more important that, you know, it's valuable and less about, for me, the followers is just like, am I getting it right? Like, is this resonating with people? And less about the numbers. And whenever I do have a few people who have reached out to me and asked similar questions to what we're talking about here. And I tell them the same thing, which is like, the number one thing you can focus on is just crafting a good piece and making sure that it's valuable. And it's the exact same stuff that you write about. Everything you put out is, I liked a bunch of your stuff this morning. I was going through it. It's awesome advice. Like, just make sure that what you're putting out is valuable and genuine. And like, people can tell. I read once, I think it was actually in Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, but he was talking to an editor of, I don't know if it was a publishing house, it probably doesn't matter, but the editor said he can immediately tell whether a writer likes people or not. And if he can, I guarantee you people can, you know, like a reader knows if you like your readers or not. And if you're like trying to actually give them a hug through your writing, or if you're kind of standing at arm's length. So that's always, some of my writing is a little bit tough love, but it's always like tough love. Like I will even like suggest, like, I want to touch you. Like, I want to like shake you gently, you know, but like in the most loving way. So I think that's the most important thing, is just, like, even above, like, some of my stuff goes out with like grammar errors, and I use headers, but sometimes not. I definitely very rarely use lists. So like, I think about my titles, but I, you know, not overly. Like, all of that other stuff, like, you know, the length of the piece and the length of the title and numbers and, you know, whatever, like, that's fine. But I think you'll get a lot farther writing a great piece and forgetting about all the other stuff than you will trying to focus on all the stuff and like go through a checklist when what you're writing is flat in terms of voice.
Yeah. So start with the message first, and then maybe add the other things as sort of like the icing on the cake, which is the message.
Yep.
I did want to ask you about headlines though, because, you know, that's the front door for somebody who doesn't know you to come in and say, hey, yeah, I want to read what you have to say. So what do you think about, I mean, when you write a headline, I mean, I just kind of wanted to know what the process was. Do you think just draw something out of the message and put it there so that people know why they need to come in, or what's your process for that?
Yeah. I don't know that I have like a hard set process. I've looked at like header tools before, like where you copy and paste your header, your title in to see like how well it scores. And I don't really like them. I think a human can do just as well deciding kind of what works. So I usually pull something out. Actually, I usually have the title first, and it starts off as like a question, and then I'll build it out throughout the piece and then kind of play with the way it's worded. I do usually try to stick to about 6 words. Some of mine are a little shorter, a little longer, but 6 words. It fits really well in the spacing, and it doesn't create a line break. And then 2, I've read that 6 words works well, but I don't get like overly religious about it. And then usually I try to allude to the pain point that's being addressed. So rather than maybe an abstract or esoteric title, I usually, like your titles are really good too, because they're really clear on both the pain point and the implied solution, like the promise of a solution. So I don't know, they can feel a little bit clickbaity when you do that, but I think that that's people read, they click into your title, like they don't know what your piece is yet. So you do have to kind of market in a way that is like, here's the problem you're having and here are some ideas, and however you want to phrase that is fine. I also am really comfortable changing my title even after I've published, so I definitely encourage people to do that. I don't know if other people would feel otherwise, but by now I know how a piece should perform within 24 hours, and if I don't see it getting those views, I almost always know it's the title.
Yeah.
And even shorter, like it can be within the first hour, I expect a certain number of views, and if I'm not getting those, I know it's probably the title.
So what's your barometer for that as far as knowing how effective that your piece is going to be?
How it's going to be, like before I publish?
No, I mean, you were talking about, in the first 24 hours or maybe even the first hour. What, I guess, is there like a general number that you're looking for, or a number of responses or something like that?
I don't watch for comments. I read them. I watch for them I don't measure them, I guess is what I should say. Because I've had pieces that go out that have lower response ratings, but I think it's just because, like, I wrote a piece recently that had physics in like half of it, and it had pretty low responses, but I think it was just an unfamiliar topic for people, especially within the love tag. So I don't measure by that. I do measure by views and claps. And typically I'll look for within the hour, it's fine. It usually is like 50 to 100 within an hour. And then usually like 1,000 within 24 hours. But some of them have been kind of like late bloomers. So it depends. But if I go like 2 or 3 days and it hasn't hit 1,000, I leave it. Like I don't delete it or anything, but I know that, something didn't resonate with that piece. So usually I'll just take another look at it from that viewpoint. Like, where did I fall flat here? Was it the title? Was it the content? Usually when that happens, it's because I've gone to a different topic. So I probably just isolated my readers a little bit. Yeah, it's usually some traction in the first hour, and then like 1,000 in the first day, but that can vary.
Okay, that's interesting. Let me ask you about frequency. You publish a lot of stuff, and how long does it generally take you once you've maybe thought about and done some reading? How long does it take you to actually write the piece that you put out?
Yeah, so I write every day. I usually write in the evening now. For a long time, it was in the morning, so I would write first thing in the morning. I get up at 6:30, and then I go into the office at 8. So I would usually write between 6:30 and 8 with some time for like getting ready for work. Lately, I've been writing in the evening, so I'll get home around 6-ish, and then I'll either write right away or I'll write right before I go to bed. And I usually spend about an hour, I'd say, like putting a piece together with like maybe a few minutes of procrastination, like deciding what piece I want to work on. Sometimes it's a little bit tough to decide like what's front of mind for that day, because maybe I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, or, I have something, but I don't have a solution or an answer crafted yet. So I'd say like maybe 10 minutes of like deliberation, and then about an hour, maybe a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more, but I try to stick to an hour just to like get stuff out. I think it's more important to get things out. And then I do often come back and edit. I'll go ahead and publish, and then a few days later, I often come back and just like reread and often take things out and edit. But for the most part, that's my process.
Okay, cool. Let's see. Any final advice that you have for just about writing in general? Do you think frequency is important, or maybe anything else that maybe we haven't covered about writing that you think would help people out there who are just trying to get their message out?
Yes. Okay, frequency. So I think the best pieces don't depend on how frequently you write, but that being said, you have to write. So I have the daily routine, not because great, phenomenal pieces are coming out of that. I think they're good. I certainly could deliberate, and some of my better pieces are things that I back burner. Like I'm continuing to put content out, but I'm like, okay, there's like a real good thought piece here that I'm needing to work on. But then I'll keep churning because it's a practice. If too many days go by and you kind of let yourself wait until the piece is perfect to publish, I think you end up not publishing. And by the time you do, it looks, feels, smells, reads very stale, in my opinion, because you've like made it too precious and you've gone too long. And I think it's more important to get things out. So the frequency it's just the importance of the craft. Like it's just important, like you're not going to lose 10 pounds tomorrow just because you decide to start walking around the block, but it's the act of walking around the block is what will eventually get you there. So I guess that's what I'll say on frequency. I do definitely still take time to like work on some of those bigger pieces, and those tend to be the popular ones, like the ones that do really well. So my daily pieces are just to like keep inertia up and like keep having a conversation with readers and like making sure that they can like rely on me for putting content out and like, hi, I'm still here. Like I'm working on stuff, but I'm active. So that's what I'll say on that. I think it's just important to have discipline around writing. Otherwise it's too easy to go too long.
Yeah, that's for sure. Because there's a million other things in the world that you could get involved with, like, let your work take over your life, or, your hobbies or what have you, just making space. And so you've got a lot of things going on in your life. How do you juggle it all and get it all done?
Routine, I guess. So my routine roughly is, like I said, I wake up at 6:30, and then what I usually do now in that time frame is like review. I do everything not work. So like check my personal email. So like the blog email. And then I have like another personal email, which I don't check, but it's like all of the non-writing things, like reading and responding to emails, editing the previous day's piece, possibly framing up some ideas for that day's piece, whatever needs to happen in that hour and a half. I also do write in the morning most days. It's just not the writing that makes it to the blog. So I actually write a ton more than I publish, as I think most writers do. So I do morning pages and then kind of like, I don't know, formulate everything, get everything situated, edit yesterday's, maybe edit, from 2 or 3 days ago if like I think of something. And then I go to work from like 8 to 5-ish. It varies a little bit. Some days it's 6, but pretty much normal working hours. And very rarely do I do anything with the blog during that time. Maybe like check in once, but I tend to not focus on it during that time. And then come home and either write a post right away or wait until later in the evening. Usually my evenings are spent with my partner. So he comes home from work about the same time and we'll get a drink or go to dinner, watch TV, like do normal couple whatever things. So like I just commit some time to him. And then usually I write the piece like right before I go to bed. And I go to bed around, I don't know, 10:30, somewhere in there. Weekends are a little bit different. So I bartend on Saturday nights. That's when I bartend. And Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings, my partner sleeps in. So that's when I spend a lot of the time like doing more of the heavier reading, some of those bigger pieces that I mentioned. Like if there's any like heavier cleanup or like guest posts, that's when I do like guest posts is like during that time. And then my weekend afternoons are pretty normal. Like normal person stuff, like go grab drinks with friends, hang out with my partner, whatever.
Yeah.
That's my schedule. It's not that exciting. It's pretty normal.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people will look at my life and see what all I accomplish. Because like you, I have a day job, and then I have this Facebook group I run. I have this show that I'm working on, and then I manage to publish on Medium every once a week, and then I have a blog to run. So I mean, there's always something to do, and I probably bring that on myself for sure. But I'm ambitious. What can I say? But yeah, well, what doors have opened for you because of your message going out there?
I think most literally, like, the sort of things that other writers are looking for is like you'll know that your writing's good when you start acquiring people who want to read your work. And then publications will reach out for cross-posting, both within Medium and then also externally. Everything I've posted externally was also pull rather than push, so they've reached out to me. So my goal, I guess, is to continue to build that out, but it's something that just kind of like, if your work is good, people want it on there because they're in the business of sharing content too. So that's one thing. And then I've had a couple of agents reach out to me to talk about a book, and then like other bloggers. That's actually one of my favorite things, is like speaking to people like you who, it's people who are in the space who are also doing their own thing, and they want to just like build, a connection and build rapport. That's really fun. So I'd say those 4 things are probably the things that people are thinking. The bigger thing for me was like the headway that I feel I've made in the message. That's actually the biggest thing that I've gotten out of it, is when I read the sort of questions and thinking that I had even 9 months ago when I started this, and then I read it now, it's like the progress that I've made just like working through thoughts and reading comments and connecting with readers, and like the more books that I've read in the last year. That's probably the biggest thing that I've gotten. That's like not, but that's not, like a bulletin board flag that, a lot of writers look for, but I think it's important to like see your message evolving.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great that you've grown out in public and tested that message and refined it just from interacting with the people who read it and maybe comment on your work. And that's I think you can learn a lot faster that way than you can just, when you're sitting in your apartment or your house and, thinking about things, but not really talking with a lot of people about it. So.
Absolutely. Some of my biggest growing points have been constructive comments. Like, not all constructive comments are truly constructive. Sometimes people are having their own insecurities, they're defensive about something else, which is fine. They're entitled to that space. But some of my greatest growth points in my writing have been people who have asked really great questions in comments. Like, they respond directly to the piece, they call things out and they're like, have you considered this other viewpoint? Or, how does this message you shared reconcile with this other message you shared? It's the community that Medium gives you. Like, the number of followers is fine, it's one thing, but the sort of connections you build are invaluable.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I love most about being a writer and just being in community with other writers and being able to learn things I don't know and maybe hopefully share something that I know with somebody who needs to hear it. So, and I think that's what keeps me going, as I'm sure it does you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So is there anything you're working on for the future that you want to tell us about?
There probably is a book in the works. I toy with other formats, so possibly like short video. I don't know. I don't think I'm interested in having like a regular podcast, but I'm interested in doing like other formats, especially as a guest, just to see if they resonate with people in different ways. So yeah, video, podcasts, possibly a book at some point. but more of the same. I mean, I say the same because it's really just about, the value, the package, and the message, and like whatever makes sense for people. So that was a little bit ambiguous, but that's kind of where I'm at.
No, that's cool. We're always growing as we go, right? And
Yeah.
if I were to ask you this next year, you might tell me something different than you told me today. So, any final words you want to leave with us?
I don't think so. A final word to you is I love what you're doing. I think it's awesome. I love this format of interviewing writers and getting their take. So yeah, I'm excited to see this up, and thanks for reaching out. It was fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. And I'm glad to have you on here, and love to have you on here again sometime.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right. You have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks.